Recently, archaeologists have discovered the mystical burial of a female vampire. They returned the oldest mummy on the planet to its relatives and discovered the most terrible mass grave of children sacrificed in history. Watching this video will make you feel uncomfortable. Hi friend, you are on the kirTop channel. 600-year-old kitchen. Novi Jišin was supposedly founded at the end of the 13th century at the crossroads of trade routes from Poland and Silesia to the Czech Republic and Hungary. The first written mention of Novi Jišin dates back to 1313, when King Johann of Luxembourg granted him the first city privileges, the right to collect customs fees and duties. Archaeologists suggest that the city used to have a predominantly wooden building, but admit that little is known about the medieval settlement. Medieval houses were built of wood and clay, but they were gradually replaced with brick structures. This was especially active in the New Age. The stone foundations of an older building were found under the floor of the courtyard room at the rear of the layout of the current house. Throughout the area bounded by this foundation, the remains of a charred wooden floor have been preserved. It was a log house built on a stone foundation. Archaeologists date it to the beginning of the 15th century. The house is located on the northern side of the city walls of the historical center, which indicates that it most likely belonged to a burgher family, a representative of the medieval bourgeoisie. In the southwest corner of the room, archaeologists found the well-preserved remains of a brick oven with a hearth, as well as a complete set of kitchen utensils with a wooden cooking spoon. They mark the perfect condition of the medieval utensils. The ceramic pots are intact and with original lids. It looks like they were washed and left to dry on the hearth. Among other artifacts, glass rings were found that could be part of a women's necklace, a spring lock for a door or chest, and an iron pitchfork with 3 teeth. The finds are now undergoing the process of conservation, after which they will be stored in the Novaya Ichinsk Museum. Three-toed extraterrestrial mummies. A few years ago, a new find was made in Peru, which was a very strange extraterrestrial mummy, which at the end of the expedition was nicknamed Maria. 5 mummies have been found, 1 female and 4 male, and according to experts, they are very similar to humans, but too different to have any relationship with us. They were found in a tomb near the Peruvian Nazca lines, which is already a warning sign that we are dealing with aliens, but the mummies also have 23 pairs of chromosomes, which could mean they are human after all. They date back to the 5th century AD, a full millennium before the Europeans discovered America. Konstantin Korotkov and Natalia Zaloznaya collected tissue samples and brought them to St. Petersburg for analysis. If Korotkov believes that this was a race of people who developed much faster than the rest, then Zaloznaya is sure that it was still a race of aliens. X-rays and computed tomography also showed that Maria has a completely different structure of the ribs than we do. It is shaped like a keel at the top, and despite the fact that the cage protects the internal organs of the creature in the same way as ours, for this, it has several semicircular ribs. In the end, they came to the conclusion that these two could not possibly be our relatives. These mummies represent a race of aliens that lived among us in ancient times, and that's a fact. Monastery in Sudan, decorated with Christian frescoes. Archaeologists from Poland have discovered a mysterious complex of rooms with Christian frescoes in the medieval monastery of Old Dongola in Africa. This city was the capital of Makuria, one of the famous African states, which became Christian in the 6th century. Scientists studied houses of the 16th, the 19th centuries and accidentally found a church with beautiful frescoes and inscriptions in Greek and Old Nubian. Under one of the houses, they found a secret passage leading to a room with amazing frescoes on the walls. On the walls were depicted the Mother of God Christ, the Archangel Michael, and the Nubian ruler. The peculiarity of this picture is that the ruler bows and kisses the hand of Christ, and the Archangel Michael protects them with his wings. Such a scene has no parallel in Nubian painting. Another unusual fresco is the image of the Mother of God dressed in dark clothes, holding a cross and a book. Christ on the opposite wall also holds a book and gives a blessing. Interest in the history of ancient African civilizations and cultures is growing, and finds such as this one are becoming a kind of key to understanding the past of this continent. Now scientists want to find out for what purposes these mysterious rooms were used and how exactly they were connected with the life of people of that time. Perhaps in the future, archaeologists will be able to discover even more secrets and mysteries associated with this amazing complex in Old Dongola and other African states. It is important to preserve these finds and continue to study history and culture in order to pass on knowledge of ancient civilizations to future generations. That's what our channel is for, to which I recommend subscribing and clicking on the bell so as not to miss a new video. Accidental discovery of Tutankhamun's tomb. Back in 1922, an archaeologist named Howard Carter encountered the greatest discovery of his life. In the Valley of the Kings in Egypt, he discovered the tomb of Tutankhamun, which contained more than 5,000 precious artifacts. But do you know that this expedition might not have happened? Western archaeologists have been exploring the Valley of the Kings since the beginning of the 19th century. When the First World War began, the excavations were suspended and did not achieve great results. At this time, the Earl of Carnarvon, or George Herbert, who financed these excavations, appears on the scene. He was disappointed by the lack of discoveries and was ready to cut off funding. But in 1922, he decided to give a chance to Howard Carter, who was sure that there was something important in the Valley of the Kings. This was the last excavation season in the valley. Working tirelessly, Carter and his team almost lost hope until November 4th, 1922, they opened the tomb of the pharaoh Tutankhamun. It was a huge discovery that surprised the whole world. In the tomb, they found more than 5,000 valuable artifacts that had been lying untouched for 3,000 years. In Carter's book, which was later found, was the address of the Earl of Carnarvon, thanks to whom these excavations took place. The Count unfortunately died the year after the discovery from complications from a mosquito bite. 50 years after Carter's discovery, many of the treasures from Tutankhamun's tomb were on display in the British Museum. The exhibition was so popular that it was extended for 6 months. Over 30,000 people visited it in the first week. On the first day of the exhibition, people stood in line for more than 14 hours to see these unique artifacts. Interestingly, in 1921, Howard Carter was a guest of the Earl of Carnarvon in his castle. This is confirmed by the population census of the time. It's funny that the profession of an archaeologist was not mentioned in Carter's documents. He was called an artist. After Tutankhamun's tomb was completely cleared in 1932, Carter decided to retire from archaeology. He died 7 years later. There was an amazing story about how perseverance and self-confidence led to one of the most important discoveries in the history of archaeology. The path to discovery is not always straight and easy, but it is stories like these that show that even the most difficult obstacles can be overcome. Ancient Roman safe chest. In 1994, in central Spain, next to the ancient Roman temple of Mithra, archaeologists found the ruins of the Villa Casa del Mitreo. Built at the end of the 1st century, it was rebuilt several times before a major fire in the 4th century. Particular attention was drawn to a large wooden chest, bound with copper and iron plates. In ancient Rome, such chests served as safes for storing valuables. The chest measures about 3 by 1.5 meters, making it the largest such find. Due to the poor condition of the chest, which was damaged in a fire, archaeologists did not dare to remove it in 1994 for fear of destruction. The chest was left in place, awaiting better times and technologies to preserve it. This is a common practice in archaeology when the safety of an artifact cannot be guaranteed. In 2017, thanks to new technologies, the chest was removed and delivered to the Institute of Cultural Heritage of Spain. Here it was stabilized and preserved. There is no information about the contents of the chest. Most likely, the owners saved valuable things before the destruction of the villa. Terrible child sacrifice. Archaeologists find evidence of human sacrifice in all corners of the globe. But what they saw in the north of Peru in the vicinity of the ancient capital of the Chimu people, Chan Chan, shocked even experienced researchers. The remains of 269 children with traces of cut wounds on the sternum and ribs. Who and why committed this terrible murder? In total, the remains of 269 children from 5 to 14 years old and 3 adults are be found in 2 adjacent graves. They all perished more than 500 years ago in the course of carefully thought-out sacrifices. Perhaps such rituals, neither before nor since, have known the history of the world. In 2011, the owner of a local pizzeria shared surprising news. His children and local dogs began to find human bones sticking out of the sand in a nearby vacant lot. He begged the archaeologist to find out what was the matter. At first, Prieto thought it was just a forgotten cemetery, but having unearthed the remains of several children wrapped in shrouds and received their radiocarbon dates, 1400 to 1450, the archaeologist realized that he had stumbled upon a large-scale and terrible burial. It is not so easy to resurrect the events in Huanchaquito, mainly because scientists know very little about the Chimu culture. Light on the mystery of Huanchaquito sheds hardened silt in which the victims were buried. Thick layers of silt indicate prolonged heavy rains. The people of Chan Chan depended on well-established irrigation systems and coastal fishing, but the rise in sea temperature and heavy rains caused by this climatic phenomenon could shake both the political and economic foundations of the Chimu Empire. Perhaps the priests and chieftains decided to perform a mass sacrifice in a desperate attempt to plead with the gods to stop the flood and the famine. Jane Eva Baxter, an anthropologist at DePaul University in Chicago, supports the hypothesis that in the eyes of the Chimu, children could be one of the most valuable gifts that could be presented to the gods. The burial of the woman vampire. In the practice of archaeologists, sometimes there are deviant burials. They stand out due to the funeral rite that differs from the generally accepted in this culture. So the dead could be buried outside the cemetery or deprived of some parts of the body. The appearance of deviant burials could be influenced by many reasons related both to the belief system and to the circumstances of life and death of people buried in an unusual manner. One of the categories of non-standard burials are the graves of the so-called vampires. Archaeologists believe that such burials contain the remains of people who were feared by others. They were afraid that the deceased would rise from their graves. To prevent this from happening, the dead were put stones in their mouths, mutilated, and even nailed to the ground. In addition, the placement of sickles and scythes on the neck or abdomen was practiced. They could appoint a vampire for an unusual appearance, witchcraft, suicide, or the first victims of epidemics. Polish archaeologists from the Nicholas Copernicus University in Torun, led by Professor Dariusz Poliński, carried out excavations near the city of Bydgoszcz, where in 2005 to 2009 an early medieval necropolis was explored, the burials of which contained valuable inventory. This year, however, scientists have focused their attention on a neighboring 17th century burial complex damaged by agricultural work. In one of the burials, archaeologists discovered the remains of a vampire woman. An iron sickle lay around her neck, and a padlock was placed on the big toe of her left foot. At the same time, the remains of a silk headdress have been preserved on the skull of this woman, which may indicate her rather high status, since in the 17th century it was a very expensive commodity. Perhaps the reason why the locals buried her in such an unusual way lies in the non-standard appearance of the woman. Her front tooth protruded forward. Lady Rye. Lady Rye is one of the oldest known mummies discovered in Egypt. She was discovered in 1881, and researchers estimate she was in her 30s or 40s when she died around 1530 BC. From the writings left about Lady Rye, we know that she was the nurse of Queen Ahmose Nefertari, the first queen of the 18th dynasty of ancient Egypt. The mummified body of Ahmose Hapi, Ahmose Nefertari's aunt, was found in Lady Rye's outer coffin. In 2009, researchers performed a CT scan on Lady Rye's body and found that she had atherosclerosis. She is the oldest known mummy with the disease, and several other Egyptian mummies also show signs of atherosclerosis. Ancient Roman sundial. Guys, are you ready to be surprised? Now I will tell you about an amazing artifact from ancient Rome, a bronze sundial in the form of pork hams. Yes, you heard it right. This amazing item was found in the 18th century at the famous Villa of the Papyri in Herculaneum. It was nicknamed pork clock or prosciutto clock, Italian for ham. The bronze ham shows a curvilinear table that helped measure the length of the shadow. The vertical columns indicate the names of the Roman months, and the horizontal lines indicate the number of hours from sunrise to sunset. Unfortunately, the pointer, gnomon, broke off and was lost. But in 2016, scientists created a copy of the clock using a 3D printer and added a gnomon tail to the ham. The researchers conducted experiments and found that the clock works quite well. It may seem that the accuracy of the clock is not high, but the Romans did not need to know the time to the nearest minute. Moreover, these clocks were more of a status item, like modern expensive Swiss watches. People wanted to show that they have such a thing and not just tell the time. You may ask, how did the Romans point the clock at the sun without a compass? The answer is simple. They set the vertical plane of the clock directly to the sun. Even in the distant past, people created interesting and unusual things that boggle our imagination even now. Mystery of the Etruscan Tomb. A new discovery awaits us in Italy. In its central part, in the city of Volci, scientists discovered a unique Etruscan tomb of the 6th century BC, which remained untouched for a long time. Many ceramic vessels and a dish with a brazier were found in this tomb. During the excavations, scientists found 2 heavy stone slabs that covered the tomb. Behind them was a room carved into the rock where they found about 30 ceramic vessels in excellent condition. Also found in the tomb was a bronze brazier with coals and skewers, on which pieces of meat remained. It is likely that a woman was buried here as no weapons were found, but a spindle was found. The remains of the woman were burned and placed in a special pot, which the Etruscans used to store the ashes. The city of Volci was a thriving center of trade and crafts until it was destroyed by Rome in 280 BC. The city fell into decay and then was abandoned. Many tombs were plundered by marauders in search of precious items. Therefore, finding an untouched tomb is a real rarity. Village where Egyptian tomb builders lived. Near the popular Valley of the Kings, where the ancient Egyptian rulers found peace, there is a lesser-known location, the village of Deir el-Medina. This is the place where the builders lived, who for decades created the tombs, including the tomb of Tutankhamun and about 100 other tombs. They also carried out the maintenance of the same tombs. The ruins of Deir el-Medina are located on the other side of the Nile opposite Luxor, and for 3 millennia, no one has lived in this settlement. The village became famous in the early 20th century, and interest in Deir el-Medina increased after Tutankhamun's tomb was found by Howard Carter. 2 Egyptologists, the Frenchman Bernard Brière and his student Jaroslav Cerny from the Czech Republic, created a detailed report on life in Deir el-Medina, which covers about 400 years. This is how long the village existed. Deir el-Medina was abandoned in the 11th century BC due to the looting of the tombs of the pharaohs, the reduction in food supplies, and the instability of life. But thanks to these ruins hidden in the sands, scientists have been able to describe the life of the working class of ancient Egypt. In its best times, the settlement consisted of 68 brick houses, standing on a stone foundation. The houses were painted white, and the windows in each dwelling were built high to reduce the amount of sun that entered the house. Usually in such a building there were 5 rooms, and in terms of area it occupied about 70 square meters. It is believed that the village was built specifically at a distance from other settlements in order to keep the skill of building tombs a secret. As already mentioned, the main occupation of the inhabitants of Deir el-Medina was the construction of tombs for the pharaohs and their loved ones. In addition, they were engaged in other crafts such as making jewelry, household items, clothing, etc. Artisans were organized into guilds, which were involved in setting the rules and norms of production, as well as resolving disputes between craftsmen. Woman buried with baby in her arms. In the area of the city of Nieuwegein, Netherlands, archaeologists have discovered many monuments of the Neolithic culture of the Zwifterbond. Ancient pastoralists settled along riverbanks in what is now the Netherlands between 5300 and 3400 BC. About 136,000 artifacts of this culture were discovered by experts under a 2-meter layer of peat and clay in the business park Het Klooster. During the excavations, archaeologists discovered 4 skeletons, removed them together with the deposits in a single block, and delivered them to the Leiden Archaeological Laboratory for research. One of the skeletons belonged to a young woman 20 to 30 years old who died about 6,000 years ago. Initially, experts considered the burial to be single. The pose of the skeleton seemed strange. The right arm was bent at an angle of 90 degrees, which is not typical for the burials of this culture. Only after a thorough analysis, experts found a tiny skeleton of an infant in the area of the hand. Collarbones, skull, long bones, and a jaw with milk teeth. Judging by the development of the teeth, the child was about 3 months old at the time of death. The find turned out to be the oldest children's burial in the Netherlands. In the grave itself, besides the bones, there are no artifacts, but pieces of deer antlers and clay pots were found nearby. DNA analysis conducted in 2019 showed that the child was a girl, while the woman turned out to be the mother of the baby. Ships of Caligula. The ships of Emperor Caligula, built in the 1st century AD, were not intended for sea battles or travel. These were magnificent pleasure houses, adorned with gold and precious stones. The largest ships of antiquity sailed on a small mountain lake and sank under unclear circumstances. The master of pleasure, Gaius Julius Caesar, Augustus Germanicus, is a man better known in history by his nickname Caligula, Boot. Caligula ruled the Roman Empire from 37 to 41 AD, and for 4 years of power he was remembered by posterity as one of the most odious rulers of a great power. As if trying to find the limits of human capabilities and test the strength of the empire's budget, the monarch carried out the most incredible and expensive projects. Huge ships launched into the water in the volcanic caldera of Lake Nemi have become one of such fantastic creations. We are talking about 2 rowing galleys. One of them served as a temple to the goddess of the forest Diana, the other was supposedly a pleasure palace. The largest ship reached 73 meters in length and 24 meters in width. The smaller vessel, 70 meters long and 20 wide, was not equipped with oars. It was pulled in tow. For comparison, the British steamer Titanic, famous for the largest ship of the early 19th century, reached 270 meters in length and 28 meters in width. Caligula's galleys were inferior in parameters to the Titanic, but they sailed on a lake with a diameter of no more than 1,000 meters. For their time, they were giants splashing in a puddle. But something else was interesting. Flowering gardens were laid out on the ships, on which fruit trees branched. Flowers were fragrant and grapes hung down. There were also baths, pools, a revolving stage, and palaces with rooms for slaves and guests. Communications included plumbing with cold and hot water, as well as warm floors. Of course, the entire interior was skillfully decorated with heads of wild animals, patterns, and noble metal. Jewels glittered on the oars. The roofs of the palace and the temple cast gold in the sun, stood on marble columns, and covered the amazingly beautiful mosaic floor. Statues stood here and there, bas-reliefs and paintings adorned the walls. The stage, which consisted of revolving platforms, was of amazing beauty and functionality. Their design used a ball-bearing system, which was reinvented only towards the end of the 19th century. And all this splendor existed 2,000 years ago. One can only guess and envy what holidays Caligula celebrated there. The skeletons of the ships, which are remarkably preserved at the bottom of the lake thanks to the solidity of the ancient Romans, were exhibited in the museum. The museum was destroyed in 1944 either by the Germans or by the Americans. Historians disagree. However, not all is lost. According to the researchers, most likely another ship rests at the bottom of the lake, reaching a length of 122 meters. It seems that the main sensations are still ahead of us. Tomb with human remains. Incredible discovery straight from the heart of Oman. Archaeologists have found an ancient stone tomb in the desert, which is over 7,000 years old. Just think about it. It was so long ago that even dinosaurs have already become extinct. In this tomb, they found the remains of dozens of people who lived in those ancient times. This place is located near the city of Eni-Afun in the center of Oman, close to the coast. But do not think that there are palm trees and sandy beaches. Around only a harsh rocky desert. Archaeologist Elizabeta Danielisova and her team from the Czech Institute of Archaeology in Prague have been digging in the sands of Oman for years, unearthing the country's ancient secrets. They even discovered a stone axe that could be over 1 million years old. Can you imagine what secrets these stones can hold? But their research is not limited to just one tomb. They also study ancient drawings on the rocks nearby. These drawings were made thousands of years after the tomb was built. What will they tell us about the lives of those people who lived here thousands of years ago? We don't know yet, but we'll definitely find out later. Metal men. Back in 1719, in the usual mining town of Falun in Sweden, everything went on as usual, until the miners who came on shift stumbled upon a strange find. It was a human body. The young man looked as if he had just died. In general, corpses are a common part of life. They do not surprise anyone. but this dead man seemed to be both flesh and metal. It was as if every millimeter of his body had been treated with something and applied the thinnest layer of metal. This was beyond the power of even a skilled craftsman, because every single hair on his body was covered with metal. The management of the mine did not know what to do with the unusual find. The corpse was exhibited in a local museum, whose visitors took the unusual exhibit as a miracle, believing that the man was metal during his lifetime, almost like a Tin Woodman or Terminator. One day, the grandchildren brought an elderly lady to the museum. She stood in front of the exhibit for a while, clutching her chest because she recognized her fiancé, Mats Israelson, in the find. It's been about 40 years since they last met. The guy was in a hurry to go on a date with the bride, but he never showed up at her place. They searched for Mats for some time. Gradually, the parents calmed down and reconciled. Friends forgot about him. The girl married another guy. Probably on the way, he met criminals who killed him and threw the corpse into the mine. The deceased should have been buried, but the local authorities realized that they could make money on it. There were a huge number of people wishing to visit the museum, and tourists came from neighboring countries. As they say, money has no smell, but the exhibit kinda does. Under the action of air, the metal layer began to thin and evaporate, and the organic matter started simply decomposing. In 1749, the body was buried, but after 10 years, they dug it up again and returned it to its original place. Only in the 30s was he finally buried forever, leaving a wax copy in the museum. But it turns out that the victim of an accidental murder is not the only such case. There were other finds which were a combination of organic matter and metal. In science, this phenomenon is known as pseudomorphism. This is such an effect when one minerals replace others with the preservation of external forms. It is problematic to reproduce it in the laboratory. It is too expensive, time-consuming, and pointless. The case with Mats went down in history precisely because of the scale of the process that engulfed the whole human body, and not the remains of a small animal, insect, or shell. Scientists prepared meatballs from mammoth meat. Artificial meat company Vow has recreated a prehistoric mammoth meatball. The meat was derived from available DNA and from an elephant, the closest living relative of the mammoth. As a result, the meat was grown from 20 billion cells and turned into minced meat. This is a unique product created from cells of non-traditional species. Although scientists think the meat could be tasty, they are afraid to eat it, fearing that the ancient protein will be deadly. The mammoth meat farming project took a couple of weeks. Vow originally planned to recreate dodo meat, but did not find a suitable DNA sequence. The main goal of the company is to demonstrate the potential of biotechnology and artificial meat as an alternative to animal slaughter. According to the company, large-scale slaughter of animals is one of the causes of global warming. The environmental impact of cultured meat production will be substantially lower than that of traditional meat production. When growing artificial meat, 45% less resources are involved. Some companies, such as Good Meat and Upside Foods, are already approved in the US. Good Meat Farm chicken is also sold in shops in Singapore. Egged Veed Girl. The Egged Veed Girl is a famous Danish mummy who was buried in a well-preserved coffin discovered in 1921. Although the tree trunk coffin was well preserved, the girl's bones were not preserved. Only her clothes were preserved, her hair, nails, and some teeth were in good condition. Also inside her coffin were the cremated remains of a child who was about 5 or 6 years old. Historians believe that the young lady was a priestess of the Scandinavian cult of the sun because of the spiral symbols on her belt. Later research showed that the girl was not from Denmark, but from the Black Forest in Germany. It is believed that she may have married a chieftain in Denmark to form a strategic alliance. The oldest natural mummy on the planet. The mummy was found in the Spirit Cave in Nevada in 1940. Despite the fact that the man died more than 10,600 years ago, his mummy is perfectly preserved. It is interesting that the body was wrapped in a sheet and a reed mat, and moccasins were preserved on the feet of the deceased. Previous analyses have shown that the remains belong to a man who died at the age of 40. Thanks to comfortable conditions, the mummy has almost completely survived to this day. The whole upper part of the skull, the skin on the back and shoulders, a bunch of dark hair on the back of the head. Next to the man, scientists found about 70 different items, including knives, baskets, and animal bones. They also found 2 woolen bags filled with ashes and bones of cremated people. Litigation about the origin of the mummy began in 1996 when scientists conducted the first radiocarbon analysis, which showed that the age of the mummy is 9,400 years. Around the same time, representatives of the Shoshone tribe, a North American group of Indian tribes who speak the languages of the Uto-Aztecan language family, declared that the mummy belonged to them. The Shoshone demanded that the remains be handed over immediately under the Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act, but the scientists did not accept the request since the mummies belonging to any people was not established. Then the long legal proceedings began, which lasted almost 20 years. Some scientists did not want to give away the remains to the tribe, as the mummy occupied a place of honor in the museum and told a lot about the ancient inhabitants of North America. 2 years ago, representatives of the Shoshone tribe gave specialists permission to conduct the first genetic analysis of the mummy. The analysis showed that the remains of the man are indeed of American origin. Scientists explained that this mummy was extremely important for the tribe since the Cave of Spirits has a sacred meaning for them. The mummy has now been officially handed over to the tribe. Rate this video with your thumbs up and tell your friends about it. And by tradition, I ask you to leave a kind comment under the video. Thanks for your views. Bye, everyone.